Hello there, men, and welcome to the Masculinism Movement channel, a place for men to be men and talk about masculinity and men's issues. I'm your host, Brian Krall, and today I'm going to be mansplaining to you about virtue, righteousness, and nobility. I want to talk about these concepts of morality and right versus wrong, and the idea of virtue and nobility and righteousness that men used to be admired for back when men were taught to follow certain codes of masculinity that I talked about at the beginning of the channel. And one of the most noble and virtuous acts when it comes to any good moral code is admitting when you are wrong. But unfortunately, many people these days are afraid of ever being seen as wrong. They feel like it is just too wrong to be wrong, and, well, better to just be right all of the time, even if they aren't actually right. They feel it's just better to insist that they are and never ever concede. This is simply the ego, not wanting to admit that you had done something less intelligent than you thought. However, admitting you are wrong and correcting yourself is actually one of the most intelligent things that a person can ever do. Something that is part of science. But if you look at history, you will see a lot of great examples of highly intelligent people who did great things, but also did some very big bad things wrong, and should have realized they were wrong and backpedaled sooner, for if they had, things could have gone a lot better, and a lot of terrible, horrible occurrences might have never happened. For instance, one of the greatest pioneers in psychiatry and neurology invented the frontal lobotomy in the 1800s. He was awarded a Nobel Prize for this. However, later it was found that this was actually a barbaric act and had actually disabled the brains and ruined the lives of hundreds of thousands of people who had nothing wrong with their frontal lobe. Perhaps there was a point at which he questioned his methods, but was too invested and entrenched in his work at that point, so he reassured himself that he knew what he was doing and continued to do brain damage in the name of psychiatry. And this was not a stupid man. He was an award-winning scientist, acclaimed by other scientists. He had enough backing to assure him that what he was doing was credible. Many people believed in him and his work, that he was smart and was doing the right thing. And then later, they found out that it was actually very, very wrong. Now, by today's more enlightened standards, he seems like a monster for doing such things. And in hindsight, it seems like seriously considering the idea of being wrong would have been much more intelligent and noble. Ironic for a man who won the Nobel Prize, but luckily that's not the same word as noble. But he is only one man, someone you've probably never heard of. So let's talk about a much more famous example that I'm sure you have heard of and probably already spent some time thinking about. Adolf Hitler was one of the greatest political leaders of all time and an incredibly intelligent man. So intelligent, he thought his knowledge was absolute truth. He had whole organizations of acclaimed scientists behind him, supporting him, and all of whom were very intelligent people as well. In fact, some of the greatest scientists on the planet, the best minds of the time, were right there in Germany. A lot of their work was creating technology for Hitler that could be used in the domination of other cultures through warfare and genocide, as I'm sure you already know. And the entire country in which this happened agreed that it was right and good. Quite enthusiastically, in fact, celebrating Hitler and his regime quite fervently, so much that his speeches would draw crowds larger than the largest rock concerts ever. And people would cheer for him, and the women would be brought to tears of joy and inspiration, because this man was such a crowd pleaser. Now, granted, he was an amazing speaker, just one of his many political strengths, but later, Germany changed their minds and realized that Hitler and his staff hadn't actually been doing the right thing all along, but quite the wrong thing. Later, they then wished that this was not even a part of Germany's history. His name is now associated with shamefulness and evil, and his acts considered some of the worst wrongdoings and villainy in history. If only one of his advisors had doubted him sooner. If only he had doubted himself. One of the most famous genocides could have been avoided. Not the largest to ever occur, though, just so you know. You see, the history of the world is filled with these types of acts done by those who are known as intelligent authorities at the time. People who are praised by the masses of their era, but later are shamed by the very same people for having been so wrong. Some people who have caused the deaths of exponentially more people than even Hitler, like Chairman Mao Zedong of China, who killed between 40 and 80 million. not just by mass executions, but because he created terrible policies that led to a large portion of his country starving to death. And he was so stubborn that he never backpedaled. That stubbornness is the opposite of nobility. And this is something that can happen with very intelligent people because their successes cause their egos to get built up to the point of narcissism. So they can never admit when they are wrong, even if they realize it, which they oftentimes do not. And it isn't just politicians who do this, though they are perhaps the most famous for it. It happens with successful leaders in any field: political, business, scientific, religious, medical, etc. Being intelligent but never considering that you might be wrong leads people to do terrible, shameful things that they cannot even feel the shame in due to their giant narcissistic ego, which won't let them feel wrong or, think that way. And it is that stubborn egotism that prevents people who are highly intelligent from becoming truly great men. So the problem is this: how will you know when you are wrong? For most people will not tell you when you are. Most people don't have what it takes to be dissenters or to debate others. And even if they do, they don't have what it takes to do so effectively. And if you have a strong personality, many people will just follow and support you as long as you can make it seem like you know what you're doing and talking about, which is why sometimes people who don't know what they are doing are able to succeed mostly off of confidence alone and the appearance that they know what they're doing even though they don't. But what I have found is that you really can't rely upon others for honest, constructive criticism on your work because most people simply don't have the mental wherewithal to give it. They may think you are right simply because you are so sure of yourself. And that is where someone who is smart and confident and presents well can come into power and then end up being an abysmal failure, like many politicians are. Not only were they never second-guessing themselves, but they were getting externally validated by their masses of supporters. When dissenters are few and far between, they are easy to write off, especially if they are not giving constructive criticism. But most people don't speak out against others. Most are conformists and believe in things simply because they are told to and aren't free thinkers. So unfortunately, you cannot rely upon others to tell you when you are going wrong and what to do differently. You must rely upon your own intelligence and intellect to second guess any important decisions before making them to make sure you are doing the right thing. Chances are you are the only one who will know and be able to do anything about it. No one else is going to course correct for you. It's up to you to steer your own vehicle. And unless you are second guessing yourself, you will be too blind to make those necessary course corrections. For there is something called sunk cost fallacy in psychology, which is what keeps people, like gamblers, chasing bad investments, like losing streaks or failure, because instead of second guessing themselves, they are allowing their losses and failure to trigger egoic defense mechanisms and just get them more and more deeply dug into the idea that what they are doing is right. You see, they want to justify how much they have already invested, so they double down and continue, when what they should be doing is cutting their losses, walking away, and finding something else to invest in. So you see, course correction is psychologically quite hard for someone who is on the wrong track and has been for some time, for it is their faulty thinking that got them on it, and is what is keeping them on it. And they probably don't know how else to think and what else to do, and find it easier to just reassure themselves of their original thoughts and course of action and to stay on that course. But it's as Einstein, one of the world's smartest men ever, once said, problems can't be solved with the same thinking that caused them. So at some point in a man's life, he has just got to admit when he has gone wrong and resolve to change his thinking and behavior. If you're enjoying listening to what I have to say, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you feel I'm adding value to your life, you can also tip me at the PayPal link below in proportion to the amount of value added. Your support will help me be able to continue this work because the oppressive fascists at YouTube are against this kind of content and actively trying to suppress it. So it is only with the help of viewers like you that I'll be able to keep fighting the good fight. I've mentioned before that I'm an athlete, something that is a central focus of my life and has been off and on for the past 3 decades. However, I've been held back from ever having a professional athletic career by constant health issues which cause chronic pain and injury. Of course, I've worked with all manner of health, fitness, and medical professionals, and no one has really been of very much help, quite frankly. And I recently lost faith completely in the medical industry and decided to try something I never had and do the opposite of something I was always taught was the right thing to do: stretching. And suddenly, the biggest problem area in my body that was constantly in pain and even just giving out on me seemed to be miraculously cured. And it seems that for the past 30 years, the advice of all of these health and fitness and medical professionals was wrong and was not helping me to recover, but was holding me back and causing me pain and injuries, sometimes debilitating ones. If only I had questioned their advice sometime sooner over the past 3 decades, maybe I would have stood a chance at actually pursuing my dream of being a professional athlete. And it just goes to show that you cannot rely upon anyone but yourself to become aware when you are doing something wrong that isn't working for you. Even when you hire someone to help you, oftentimes they won't be able to, simply because they do not have enough data, not anywhere near as much as you do on what it is like to be you and in your situation. Okay, so simply by virtue of the fact that they are not you and not in your situation as much as you are, even with their professional levels of expertise, they are probably never going to be able to have the same level of insight into your situation as you will. And ultimately, the responsibility for you and your life, unfortunately, lies solely with yourself. And more so, depending upon how personal the issue is. If you're a politician and everything you do has to do with the state, that's different than if you are an athlete and everything you do is physical and has to do with your own body, like in my situation. So it's important to know what someone else could actually help you with and what is going to be mostly or entirely up to yourself. And you'll find that there will be varying degrees of responsibility that you ought to take in different situations, something I'm going to talk more about in the future. However, sometimes people will actually have what it takes to point out to you what you are doing that is incorrect or improper, though if it is not a professional that you have hired to consult with you on it, they probably won't be giving you the best, most professional level of advice. They may not speak to you with a sense of customer service like a professional would, and what they have to say may be difficult for you to hear, as they may even be a bit harsh about it, especially if this is occurring online. And as long as they aren't being haters, it's important to be receptive to what they have to say and not let your ego get in the way. I've had too many people ignore the constructive criticism or helpful advice I offered them, even when I was being nice and helpful about it, and they stayed stuck exactly where they were, doing things in an ineffective or entirely incorrect manner. So never ignore someone's feedback as long as they aren't being a hater. It could in fact mean the difference between your success or failure. I know for me that most of my own success has come from listening to the constructive criticisms of others so that I can make the appropriate course corrections. Just do not take it personally and let pride get in the way, for you are not your actions. You can always act differently. The fact that you have done something wrong doesn't mean you are a bad person. In fact, it takes serious integrity and virtue to put your pride aside and admit when you are doing something wrong and then try to correct it. Those who do that are truly great, noble, righteous men and are generally admired for it. But it doesn't matter how smart you are. If you are stubborn, that negates your being smart, and you will start to look like you aren't very smart. Intelligence without the consideration of the possibility of being wrong will only lead to horrible mistakes and failures that can bring you to ruin. Like, for instance, marrying the wrong girl, and never listening to your friends and family when they tell you she's no good, and never taking a moment to second guess your feelings with your rational mind. What separates the truly great men from the great failures is the ability to see one's own wrongdoing and correct one's mistakes. The history of the world is filled with great men who have been very humble and used these principles for their success, such as Thomas Edison, who had to be wrong over 1,000 times before finally inventing the light bulb. If he were busy being too proud to admit when he was wrong, it would have never happened, and he would not be known as the great man who invented electric light, one of the world's greatest inventions that I am being very cheaply bathed in right now so that you can see me clearly. Something that was impossible before him, but with over 1,000 failed attempts, he eventually made possible by failing forward every time. So you see, there's no shame in being wrong. In fact, realizing it is the noblest, most virtuous, and intelligent thing someone can do. It takes real integrity, and being able to do that and correct yourself is what will lead to success and true greatness, and may prevent some very horrible failures, or at least a lot of wasted time and other ergonomic resources in the sunk cost fallacy. But what's more, and is truly magical about being able to admit you were wrong, is that it is simply just so much easier to not have to be right all the time and try to be, perfect. What a great burden upon your shoulders to have to be right and perfect all the time, to the point where you try to keep it up even when it is a facade and you are not right anymore. Doesn't that just sound so stressful? I can't think of anything more difficult or uncomfortable than trying to be the perfect specimen for human behavior, and trying to cover up my faults and flaws, of which I have many. And you'll find that it just feels so relaxing and comforting to be able to admit that you are human and imperfect and have faults and flaws like everyone else and have made a mistake and will simply just try again another way. But even oftentimes when I'm debating with someone, and even if it is obvious that I know more about the subject than they do, I will start by saying, well, I may be wrong, but last time I checked, XYZ was true. It just takes so much pressure off of me to not need to be 100% right all the time and to state that I could possibly be wrong. And it actually gives me more credibility that way too. But of course, I am always checking my facts and second-guessing myself, because the world of knowledge is always finding new truths and evidence and making corrections to itself, as is one of the functions of science. And so it is important that we all do the same and keep up with this new age of enlightenment that we find ourselves in with the internet and the ability to easily fact-check. And anytime someone points out to me that I've said something incorrect, I admit it right away and just say, oh, okay, I was wrong, or, oh, I was mistaken. Oftentimes that person will have already prepared for a debate or argument with me in their mind, as they aren't used to people conceding. And the look on their face when they realize their whole argument is now superfluous is priceless. It's like they are intellectually constipated now. Like they have this huge diatribe that they're just holding back. It's hilarious. I've even had these feminist political zealots sometimes still try to argue with me and say something like, well, why would you say something like that? Very angrily, hoping that I would reveal some sort of misogynistic patriarchal ideology or something like that. And I'll just reiterate the fact that I was mistaken by saying quite simply, I was mistaken. And then they just stand there staring at me, flabbergasted, wanting to give me a lambasting, but being unable to, since I've already conceded the argument to them on that point. And there's no need to argue once you've admitted you were wrong. And I feel like I've been able to avoid a lot of unnecessary bickering with bitchy feminists that way, and focus my limited time and ergonomic resources on having constructive conversations and intellectual talks and debates like I'm doing here on this channel. So in conclusion, just remember this. It is not the being wrong that necessarily causes problems in life. It is thinking one is right when one is wrong. And so it is not necessarily wrong to be wrong at all, but it is wrong to have not questioned yourself and to act righteously when you may be wrong. Wrongdoing comes from egoic righteousness, which is not true virtue or nobility. Those with nobility and virtue are the ones who second-guess themselves and will admit when they are wrong. For doing that is the most truly righteous thing one can ever do. And keeping the idea in mind that you might be wrong is the wisest thing that you can do, and the best way to ensure that you always make the right decision.
That concludes this video. Thanks for listening. I hope I mansplained that good enough for you. If you like what you heard, please click the like button. And if you feel you gained some value from this video and would like to give some back, please do so with the PayPal link below, because your support helps fund me doing this work and fight the good fight for men like you. If you are ready to take the red pill and wake up from the matrix and the matriarchy controlling it and learn everything you need to know about female on male sexism, get your copy of my newly released book called Misandry Exposed, on sale now for a special price that won't last long. So check it out by clicking the link below. And otherwise, take care of yourselves, men, because no woman out there is going to.